Here we are. We've made it to the realistic, or more realistic, example of how to do a more than two group type analysis. So this is, you know, your ANOVA type of things. Now, as you all know, rarely in biology is anything ever really simple. In fact, the last example is actually overly simplified. As there's things in there that I probably, should have harped on, but I didn't. One of those being you know, we don't know if some of those animals that we had in that previous study are actually all from the same mom, the same dam, if you will. We don't know. If they are all from the same mother, then they're not really independent. But we kind of treated them like they were independent because we don't know. So that's one of those things where it's important, that's an important factor for us to know. If we know, then we can handle it. If we don't know and we treat it like independent, but then find out later that they aren't, we'll have to redo the analysis. And it calls a lot of, the inference into question, right? So unfortunately, that happens a lot. Unfortunately, in a lot of studies, we don't always know what all the nesting is that's happening. Sometimes it's impossible for us to find out because the authors no longer have access to the data. They can't find the data. It's been too long since they did the study. Lots of reasons, right? So what we're going to do right now is we're going to imagine that we have a case where we do know more about what's going on in the study. And we are going to do our best to handle that complexity. And I'll show you how this works using a hierarchical Bayes model. In this particular example, we are going to be using an in vitro type of example. So we've done a lot of in vivo examples so far. Now we're going to get into the in vitro. And I'm saving the in vitro for this mostly because we can figure out sometimes, most of the time, some of the complexity. We can't always get all the complexity. There's lots of different things that could be adding complexity to an in vitro study that authors don't tell us in their paper. But we can usually get some information about it. So in this particular example, we are going to imagine we have a study. And this study is an in vitro study. And we're using multi-well dishes. And we're going to, in this example, assume that all of our vehicles are actually on every plate. Or so I should restate that a different way. Every plate will have vehicles on it. There we go. That's probably the easier way of saying it. All right, so every plate will have vehicles. But also in this study, what we have is we're going to have 3 replicates of every single treatment level, both on the dish and also on different dishes. So we're going to have on a single dish, 3 vehicles. It's a 6-well dish. We've got 3 vehicles. We've got 3 treated of a single treatment level, all on one dish. On the next dish, we'll call it dish 2. We've got 3 vehicles and then 3 all of another group. And then dish 3, we're going to have 3 vehicles and then 3 of all of another group. So I'll show you what this ends up looking like. We're going to simulate this data. So here's plate 1. Here we've got 3 vehicles, mean of 10, standard deviation 1. Here we've got 3 of concentration 1. Concentration 1 in this case is 1 micromolar. It has a mean of 15, standard deviation 5. Again, we're just simulating this data. I could have already simulated this for you and then just give you a spreadsheet, but I decided, let's peel back the curtain a little bit more so you can see the magic going on. So this way, you kind of learn how to make your own simulated data so that you can, play with these models and figure out, how these models work. To me, it's better to experiment with these models and experiment with how we're going to build the model using data. We'd prefer to use actual data when we can get it, but simulated data is really easy to do. These 2 lines here for plate number 2. This is your vehicle. Again, 3 samples, mean of 12, standard deviation 2. 3 more samples for plate number 2. This is going to be concentration 2, which is 10 micromolar. They'll have a mean of 30, standard deviation of 10. This is plate number 3. Plate number 3 has 3 vehicles with a mean of 15 and 3 of concentration 3, which is 100 micromolar, with a mean of 40, standard deviation 10. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a situation where we do actually have a plate effect. Now in this particular analysis, we're going to assume that we are able to take as much of the plate effect out, and that the plate effect that we're modeling here is going to be consistent across the vehicles and the treateds. What that means is there could still be residual plate effect at the treated level, but it will be significantly reduced, okay? And that's because, we can't get rid of all of it because we're assuming a uniform plate effect, but it's going to do the best that it can. And generally speaking, unless you have a lot of samples, a lot of plates, this is probably going to be the best you're going to be able to do. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you may actually not have enough plates if you want to try to separate this out with an interaction term of plate and treatment. That gets kind of messy, but this model will suffice for most cases that I've seen. So here we go into plate 4, plate 5, plate 6, and then plate 7, 8, 9. And you can see it's just the same pattern. And like I said, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a situation where we have a plate effect that's very noticeable in our data. Okay, so again, when we start off this this analysis, we're going to run this group of code right here. I'm actually not going to run anything if I can avoid it, because I've been having some instability issues when I run this, just because of driver issues. I need to update some drivers on this computer. Here, so after we run that, you get the normal warnings about, versions and whatnot. Don't worry about that too much. Since, like I said, I don't have real data, this line or this block right here is going to simulate the data. And then this is the plate information. So I need to create, actually, here, let me go over to the stand file. This will be easier to explain. So the way that this is going to work when we actually run this data through, here's our data block. We need to specify a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of input parameters coming in to Stan, right? So we have to tell it the number of plates, that's J. We have to tell it the number of samples, that's N. And we have to tell it the number of treatment groups, that's TX. Now keep in mind, vehicle is a treatment group as well. So we've got 0, we got 1 micromolar, 10 micromolar, and then 100 micromolar. So that's a total of 4 treatment groups. We're also going to have plate N. This tells us, this maps which sample goes to what plate. And then we've got treatment. Again, this is a vector of size N. Just like plate is a vector of size N, treatment is a vector of size N. What this does is we need to map every single one of these samples to a treatment. And so that's what this is going to accomplish. And then Y is going to be our measure of interest. So I didn't really tell you what this in vitro assay is. It's whatever you want it to be. We're just literally just playing around here. So it could be a fluorescence assay if you wanted. It could be something else. So here we've got our data, right? And we have it assigned in a very particular way so that then we can very easily assign out the plates and the treatment information. So again, with our data, we've got, a random sample, 3 random samples coming out of a normal distribution with a mean of 10 and 1 for plate 1 vehicle. Here, what we're saying is we need to assign our plates. So we know that the first 3 are plate 1 vehicle, the next 3 are plate 1 micromolar samples. So that 3 plus 3 is 6. So plate number 1, this is what this means. We're going to repeat 1 to represent plate number 1 6 times. Then we're going to do the same for plate number 2 6 times. So in other words, what we're doing is when we're building out this vector for plates, it's going to be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay? The next grouping is going to be 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And then the next 6 blocks are going to be 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Next 6 blocks are going to be 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. And again, the reason why we're doing that is because in this in vitro data, the first 3 elements of the vector is vehicle, vehicle, vehicle on plate 1. So plate 1, plate 1, plate 1, and then 1 micromolar on plate 1. Plate 1, plate 1, plate 1. So that's what this is saying. This next one, TX, this is the shorthand I use for treatment. And here we've got the first group. The first group is vehicle. So 1, 1, 1. So vehicle is 1. 2 is 1 micromolar. 3 is 10 micromolar. 4 is 100 micromolar. So because the first 3 elements are vehicle on plate 1, the first 3 elements of the treatment vector is 1, 1, 1. The next 3 elements of the in vitro vector is 1 micromolar. So that means that the next 3 in treatment need to be 2, 2, 2. Okay? So in vitro data, the first 3 is vehicle, and vehicle is a treatment of 1, so that's 3 times 1, 1, 1. And then the next one is 1 micromolar. That is level 2, and that is going to be 3 times 2, 2, 2. So it's going to go 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. And then it's going to be 1, 1, 1, and then 3, 3, 3. And then 1, 1, 1, and then 4, 4, 4. And then 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3. 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 4. Hopefully that makes sense. And it's kind of explained here, right? Because again, we're taking 3. So the first 3 elements are vehicle 1, plate 1, and then 1 micromolar, which is level 2. So vehicle is level 1. 1 micromolar is level 2. 10 micromolar is level 3. 100 micromolar is level 4. So we run these lines, and then we're going to run the, I haven't used, I think I've said this word a couple times, but I haven't really written it out for you. So if you've heard me say MCMC, this isn't some new wrapper. This is Markov chain Monte Carlo. Markov chain Monte Carlo is how we're calculating the posterior probability. I'm not going to get into all the technicals of this. Personally, I don't think you need to know that. If you really care, you can go look at the documentation for STAN and figure out how exactly they do the Hamiltonian descent Monte Carlo. Anyway, we're going to do that to get our posterior distribution. So here we're going to load in the STAN model. So let's go back to STAN. We talked about this data block right here, right? We've talked about this just a few minutes ago. So now we're going to go into parameters. So parameters, again, are the things that we want the simulator to give us values for. Transform parameters are the other thing that we want to give us values for. So we've got several parameters here, which means the model is going to spit out a lot of stuff at us. The first one we're going to talk about is a vector of size j, which is the number of plates, A. This is the varying intercept for each plate. This is the plate effect. And it's easiest if we come down here to talk about this. What we're actually fitting at this line here, the transform parameters for y hat, what we're actually fitting here is the kind of a regression model. It's a linear model. Okay, you can think of it as a linear regression if you wanted to. And for each one of the samples, we are going to have this term here. This is the intercept, and it's going to be an intercept on a per plate basis, which means this is a varying intercept for each plate, more or less the plate effect. Okay. This right here is for our treatment effect. And then this is for the treatment level, sorry. B is for our treatment effect. So here you can see we have a vector of size Tx, and remember Tx here is the Tx here is the number of treatments. We've got 4 treatment levels. So when I equals 4, well, when I equals, let's say 1, it'll be the first element of the sample vector. And so the treatment for I is vehicle, which means this will be 1. And then what it's trying to calculate then for vehicle is this B value, or beta, if you will. I didn't call it beta. Maybe if I update this code, I will actually call it beta. But that B is your treatment effect. So you can think of it as the slope of the line. So this is the treatment level. This is the slope of the line. This is the plate or the intercept. Now what I could do is I could change this model up just a little bit more. And I've actually thought about this. I could add something else that would actually be the intercept. So I could have this kind of a situation. Oopsies. And then take that plate effect. It would actually be A plate times, I don't know, let's call it eta plate. I could also do that. That would be allowable. But for right now, this is the model that we're running with. And so the intercept will be the plate effect. And then we got a treatment effect, and this. The more complex you make this model here, the harder it is going to be to fit. You may get better results. It all depends on what you're trying to do. But right now, the plate effect is just a floating intercept. And that's how you should think of it for these purposes. So A is that varying intercept for each plate. So the plate effect. B is our treatment effect. Mu A, anytime you see mu, we usually use that to mean some kind of mean. Mu A is going to be a global mean across all the plates. It doesn't really come into play here. It comes into play down here. So it is the hyperprior for the A value. And again, it's a normal distribution. And then sigma A, anytime you see sigma, we usually use that to mean standard deviation. So sigma A is standard deviation of the global mean. And then sigma Y is the standard deviation of the measure of interest. Okay, so in transform parameters, we're creating this other value called Y hat. And here we're just doing a simple for loop. I'll probably update this code at some point, and I will take out the for loop and I'll vectorize this code. I just haven't gotten around to it right now. In terms of our model, we have a prior for sigma A, that it's a uniform distribution spanning from 0 to 100. And all values have equal probability. This is what we call a flat uninformative prior. For A, we're going to use a hyperprior that's based on mu A and then sigma A. For B, we have a normal that has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Sigma Y, again, we're going to do the same kind of uninformative prior. And then Y, this is our main model, is going to be normal distribution with Y hat as its mean and sigma Y as the standard deviation. So that is our model. This is how we're bringing in the data. Remember, J was the number of plates. We have 9 plates here, so J equals 9. N is the number of samples. In vitro data, the length of that is our number of samples. We have 4 treatment groups, including the control. So we got we got vehicle. We've got 1 micromolar, 10 micromolar, 100 micromolar. That's a total of 4 treatments. Our plates, plate term is going to be our plates that we created in the block above right there. Tx is what we created right here, Tx. And then Y is our in vitro data, which was the data that we simulated right here. And then it's going to fit the model, and it will spit out this really long amount of stuff. So remember, again, A is our plate effect. B is our treatment effect. So B is what we actually are going to use in order to calculate whether or not treatment is different from vehicle. Now, one of the other things that we are interested in is, well, how good is y hat? So we're using the transform parameters in this case. We're not doing the generated values. We could do the generated values, but we're not. We're going to just take a quick look at the y hat and see, does this really make sense? And these numbers do make sense more or less, for the most part. So I'm pretty happy with those. There's a little bit of shrinkage that occurred because of the hierarchical model, but I'm pretty satisfied with what I have here. So like if you look at, let's see, let's look at y hat 1. So we have 14.26 as the value for y hat 1. Y hat 1 would correspond to this one right here. So it's not bad, it's a 10, 1. So it's not horrible. Again, things are going to move up and things are going to move down because it's trying to move things towards that central mean. And what that does is that ends up shrinking some of this variance a little bit, which decreases the likelihood that we're going to have false positives at the end of our analysis. So anyway, this is pretty good. Generated quantities is something that I could add to this. I didn't, mostly because I'm having, like I said, I'm having issues with my drivers, and they're interfering with Windows, and my computer's crashed already almost 10 times today, not quite. And so I'll take care of those driver issues another time. But anyway, this is, you can see I got tired of my computer constantly crashing when I was running this. I doubt your computer's going to crash when you're running Stan like this. I just have some special driver issues lately. So I did end up saving it and loading it a lot so that I didn't have to rerun this. Not that it didn't take that long, but it was the Stan part that was crashing the computer. So here, I'm trying to get my rope in place. So you can see it's a pretty narrow rope, which is to be expected because we don't have a lot of standard deviation going on with respect to our vehicles, but we do have the vehicles across a lot of plates. And thankfully it was able to handle that situation. Here we're going to run all this, and you can see these are the different 95% highest density intervals. This one's for 1 micromolar. Yeah, I need to change that. I said 2 micromolar. No, that's 10. And then 3 is 100 micromolar. There we go. So when I rerun this, this will get updated. And then we have our plot for 1 micromolar. So this is helping us answer the question. And I need to update that, don't I? I do. So I should have put that closer to about, what is that? -2.5, -1, maybe? Maybe. Okay. Anyway, so these labels need to get shifted over, but that's where the 95 highest density interval is for the difference distribution. It's clearly within the rope there. Here again, this should be closer to, what is that? Closer to probably, I don't want to call it 0, maybe call it -1 again. And then here at 10 micromolar, you can see it's completely outside the rope. So 10 micromolar is completely different. And again, that should be closer to about, that's 2.5. So we'll put that positive 2.5. And here, let's go ahead and let's try to run all this, see if it crashes. This will be fun. So far, so good. I think I already did all this. Let's see if it'll let me go straight into here. Yeah, it will. Perfect. So let's try that. Ooh, I need to move that over, don't I? What do you think? Maybe this is probably -1 here. So if I moved it over to about -1.9, let's see what that looks like. That's not bad. I'm getting closer. Oh, that looks really good. So we'll put it, oh, but it's run up against that over there, isn't it? So, yeah, that's not great. How about this? There we go. I'm happy with that. Are you happy with that? If you're not, you can always change it too. Let's run this one now. See how this looks. Ooh, that's much better. Maybe we could put that closer to 0. Yeah, that label right there at 0 looks really good. And again, you can see that, the 95% highest density interval is still within this rope. So we can't reject the null hypothesis in this particular case. Let's do 10 micromolar or 100 micromolar, sorry. And you can see here, oh yeah, that's good alignment there. And you can see the 95% highest density interval is completely outside this rope. So we could say for sure that the 100 micromolar, did I type 1,000? There we go. We can say for sure that the 100 micromolar is definitely outside the rope. And so that would be our conclusion that we come to from this. So that's that. I mean, we're kind of building off of all the stuff that we've done before. I just want to come back to this stand file, sorry. This part here is probably the big workhorse of this whole thing. And again, this is where we will try to find what the plate effect is. We try to find this treatment effect, right? Right here. And so this is the part where if you are looking to maybe build this out to additional things, you really need to figure out how all this nesting is occurring. And then you can change this line. And that's really it. I mean, there's not too much to it. Now, I will say this example is highly unrealistic. Highly unrealistic. In my experience, it's pretty rare for us to find a study where they're going to do 3 replicate plates for every single concentration. That's pretty rare. I've seen 2. I see a lot of people try to get away with 1 because they're saying, well, but I've got 3 replicates within the plate itself. Here's the problem with that. The problem with that logic is you can't get rid of the plate effect if you're not repeating what's on the plate, on a different plate. You can't ever get rid of that plate effect. And that could be okay. I mean, maybe there isn't much of a plate effect at all. Maybe that's fine. If you're in a GLP situation and you have been able to validate the fact that I've run this assay, several times, I shouldn't say several, I've run this assay, we validated it on maybe 30 different plates, and we get very little variance from it, great. Then I'd say you probably have your assay system to the point where you really don't have a plate effect. The problem is a lot of folks don't do that, especially on the R&D side. If you're going into the regulated side, and so you are doing GLP, yeah, chances are you know if you have a plate effect or not, and you've done everything in your power to get rid of it. So so I'm not really talking GLP. I'm talking, maybe you've got an R&D lab, maybe you got an academic partner, something like that. If they haven't validated to demonstrate that they do not have a plate effect, and I mean on a lot of plates, 30, 40, 50 plates, then I wouldn't buy the fact that they don't have a plate effect. Now, you go into the analysis with the data you have. Typically, we are not consulted before somebody does an experiment. And so you're going to have to make the determination as to, how much confidence you put in those results. I personally do not want my name associated with anything where I don't have confidence about the study design. So I have refused work from people before because I will not stand behind an analysis on data that I feel is subpar. And that's something you need to think about, whether or not you have the ability to do that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you feel too much pressure. And that's unfortunate. And I've seen that in other places where I've worked. When I was a manager, one of the things that I did was to stand behind my staff when they said, nope, we didn't consult on this study design, we did not sign off on it, and we're not comfortable analyzing this data, then I'd put my foot down and I'd defend them. Not everyone has that kind of management, and which is unfortunate. But if you're running into a situation where they have a single, concentration on a single plate, that's one of the questions we have. Now, what's interesting is if you flip this and you say, well, okay, what if I have a single cage, right? So I've got a single cage and all the animals within that cage received one single concentration. So what you're saying is the treatment has now been assigned to the cage. If you don't have another cage that has that same situation where that concentration was repeated in a separate cage, again, you've got the treatment nested within the cage and you can't separate them. From a statistical analysis standpoint, that means you have an N of 1. And it's the same thing in vitro with the plate. Unless you have another plate such that you can get rid of that plate effect, you have an N of 1. So think about that, because the number of experimental units you have is 1. And we can't always get rid of these effects. So sometimes you're going to have folks arguing with you saying, I've got 5 mice in this cage, and all of them receive the same treatment, and so therefore I have an N of 5. And you're saying, no, you don't, because I can't separate out that cage effect from the treatment effect. That causes a lot of problems when you then go to do inference, when you then try to use that data in a risk assessment. Someone like me is going to come along and say, no, you had an N of 1. No, absolutely not. You can't use that data in a risk assessment. You only had an N of 1. So, you have to be very, very cognizant of what is going on with that study design. And like I said, it's not uncommon in vitro studies to have a single plate, and the only 1 micromolar doses are on that one single plate. They are not on any of the others. And they can't provide you evidence that there's no plate effect. Well, guess what? You probably don't want to do that analysis. And again, that's another place where they should have gone to somebody who is knowledgeable in study design, who can say, no, that's not right. You need to do it this way, so that they would have more plates. So like I said, this situation I'm showing you here, not very common. Let's talk about ToxCast. Some of you are interested in the Tox21 or the ToxCast assays. Keep in mind, ToxCast is supposed to be used for screening. And so when you're doing things in screening mode, you are going to go, kind of fast and loose with the study design, because you don't want to spend a lot of money doing replicates of everything. Instead, you want to just go through and get a sense of, is there a there or not, move on with life. So in ToxCast, it is not uncommon to have all of your ethyl methyl bad stuff only is represented on a single plate. That's not uncommon. It's also not uncommon to have no replicates of things, or maybe an N of 2. So you might have a concentration response and you have only 2 representations of that concentration response for ethyl methyl bad stuff on a single plate. So what's going on here is I can't get rid of the plate effect very well, right? Now, some people argue, well, you can get rid of the plate effect, though, because you got these vehicles that have been run on all these different plates. Okay, so if that's the argument you want to go with, that's cool. And given that this is ToxCast and it's only used for screening, not for making risk assessment decisions, not for making regulatory decisions, it's only used for screening, stress on that screening part, then what we can do is we can say, okay, if we were to assume that the plate effect on vehicle is the same for chemical, then yes, I could probably get rid of it. But what a lot of people do is they'll divide. They will take the treated data, divide it by vehicle on a per plate basis. That is a big no-no. You do not do that. Just the same as you do not take the liver weight and divide it by the body weight in order to get a normalized uh, liver weight. You don't do that. You can only do that. You can only do that if the relationship is linear. It's not. It's not linear in the plate effect, and it's not going to be linear in the liver weight body weight situation. You cannot assume that it's linear. It probably is not linear. That is why we were calculating an individual plate effect for every single plate. That is how you deal with this situation. You do not simply divide by vehicle because vehicle is on multiple things, because what you're doing at that point is you're just standardizing it to a random value. That vehicle is a random number from a distribution, a population distribution, just the same as that body weight is a random number. And it is not a linear relationship necessarily. So you can't just divide. It doesn't work that way. But people do this all the time. They do it with microarrays. They do it here. They do it there. The other big problem with ratios is, what's the easiest way to say this? So you have to propagate your error or your uncertainty when you've got this data, right? So you need to make sure that whatever the uncertainty is in that vehicle is also represented in that quotient that you're calculating. So the quotient is the answer from a division problem. So if you've got chemical divided by vehicle equals some ratio, you need to make sure that you're propagating the error in both the numerator and the denominator. Unfortunately, you cannot do that through simple division. It's much more complicated than that. In fact, in the statistical literature, there isn't really good guidance on how to do that, which is one of the reasons why statisticians hate when people do that. So again, ratios are not your friend here. You cannot simply divide the chemical data divided by the vehicle data and call it good, because you're ignoring all of that uncertainty and you're turning things into purely fixed effects when they are random effects. And that's not okay. So, getting off my soapbox, the thing that you need to know is that we need to be able to account for this treatment or this plate effect somehow. The way we do that is right here. We put it into the model as a term. That's how we take care of it. We aren't doing crazy division. We are taking care of it as a term in the model. Anyway, work through this example. There's going to be an assignment for you to do as well to also work through this and to get some ideas on how we might make all this stuff work together. Please work through the assignment if you actually want to learn this. If you are just here for grins and giggles, or you're just here to watch the videos, that's cool. But I highly recommend doing the assignments because they will give you extra practice to do things. Anyway, having said all that, again, if you remembered nothing else I talked about, in your stand file, that's the model that's doing all the work to get rid of that plate effect. All right. It also gives us our treatment effect. The other thing to remember is ratios are not going to help you get rid of a plate effect or any other kind of effect. That's not how we do this. We have to put them into a model. There you go. And last point, you're probably not going to see a study design this beautiful with in vitro data. Just move on. Figure out if that's going to be a deal breaker or not. If you're in a GLP lab, again, ask to see their verification that there is no plate effect. If you're not in a GLP lab, ask to see their verification that there is no plate effect. And if you don't feel comfortable being the study design guru, help them go find someone who is. That's something that I do. There's lots of statisticians who will do that to some degree. Different people have different areas of expertise. Some of us know in vitro assays really well. I've run those. Some of us know animal assays really well. I've run those too. It's not easy. It's not as easy as people like to think. If there's enough call for it, maybe I'll put together a study design course as well. Um, because it's not easy. Study design is really hard. And ultimately, it's the study design that determines how we analyze the data. It's not the other way around. When you design the study, that study design is what we have to know first, because then we figure out how we're going to analyze the data. All that stuff should be done up front before the study ever gets performed. In an ideal world, that's how we would do it. Anyway, thank you. Definitely do the practice, do the assignments, and I'll talk at you again soon.